Hello everybody, it's Professor Rich, and this is a video about formal and informal language in English. This was requested by Claudia off my Facebook page. If you would like to request a video for me to do, then my Facebook page is the best place to go to do that. You could also post a comment below, but I don't look at those quite as much. Alright then, let's talk about formal and informal language. So the first thing to talk about is that really language is becoming more informal, and it has been becoming more informal for some time now. Things like contractions are pretty much always used in speech, even in formal situations, especially in Britain. In America, they're kind of hanging on to the idea that not using contractions is more formal in speech. But in the UK, that's really disappearing. However, of course, we still do use stressed auxiliary verbs when we want to emphasize certain things. So I might say, for example, that I did not eat all the biscuits. And in that situation, I'm not saying did not instead of didn't because I want to be more formal. I'm saying it because I want to emphasize that I did not eat the biscuits. So that's for emphasis rather than to be more formal. So the general rule with speech is to always use contractions, and particularly as a second language learner, in my experience, the most likely situation is that you're not using contractions enough, so you should use them more, even when you're being formal. Alright, what else we got? Greetings. Okay, so how's it going? That's my favourite informal greeting. You're right, if you want to get even more informal. It's a little bit regional, that I think might be very common in the northwest and the northeast, north of England in general. You're right. Probably the most formal, well-used greeting in English would be good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Those really are quite formal. I wouldn't really say to my friends, good afternoon. It sounds pretty formal. I might say good morning, but that would be, for example, if we were on holiday together and we'd woke up in the hotel and I go down and I see them at breakfast and we say, oh, good morning. And in that situation, yeah, you'd say good morning. But sort of leaving the house and then maybe going to work and meeting my colleague, it depends. I mean, yeah, good morning is possible. It's sort of, if you can see that someone has recently woken up and they've just had breakfast and whatnot, then yeah, you could say good morning in an informal situation as well. But like I say, most of the time those good morning, good afternoon, and good evening are quite formal. That's quite different to good night. There's various situations which are not formal where you could use good night. I'm just going to leave that to your intuition. Right. Okay, so verbs. A few things about verbs. Latin verbs, as you may know, are preferred in formal situations, and we tend to avoid using phrasal verbs. That does go for speech as well as for writing. So, for example, you might use proceed instead of go on, and you might use acquire instead of get hold of, and things like that. We also tend to be more polite in formal situations. I guess this is something which tends to apply across all languages, but it is true even more so in English. So how do you be more polite in English? Well, you use a certain kind of intonation, and we tend to use less direct speech. For example, we would say things like, would you mind? Could you please? Would it be possible that? And if you were introducing someone, for example, instead of saying, this is Rob, you would say something like, may I present Mr. Smith, for example. You can also use their title like that and the surname, Mr. Smith, and obviously that's a lot more formal. Alright, so that's pretty much all I've got to say about speaking. Let's talk a little bit about writing for a minute. In writing, the distinction between formal and informal is greater. In writing, we still really do use a lot of rules for formal writing, which are or have already disappeared from speaking. So, for example, in writing, in formal writing, we do not use contractions. We avoid using contractions. That's not to say that maybe the occasional contraction might not appear in formal writing, but I'm just saying that in general, we would avoid those. We would also prefer Latin verbs. In fact, you shouldn't really see any phrasal verbs in formal writing. You should try to avoid those as well. There's lots of formal adverbials. These are the kind of words that you wouldn't really hear in speech unless it was very, very formal or perhaps quite academic speech. But in writing, there's quite a lot of them which can be used. Words like notwithstanding, nevertheless, furthermore, and those kind of words. Right, so that's about all I've got to say for the moment on that subject. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. I'm quite certain that there's plenty of things that I forgot about this, but I just wanted to give you a general idea, as I always do in my videos. If you really want to sound more formal, one way of doing it might be pronunciation, because of course, if you have more of a received pronunciation type of accent, then you can certainly come across as more formal than if you don't. Thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, and all that magical stuff. I'm looking for requests for videos. I'm making videos again, and I'm taking requests, so just let me know what you want. And well, catch you later.